Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Investment Professional Certification webinar series. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Dave Lank. I'm joined by my colleague Andrew Ross, who is the SIPC Program Coordinator, and I'm the Marketing Director for the SIPC program. We're really pleased to have you with us today and to hear Bob Willard, who's going to be talking about the business case for corporate sustainable strategies in a few moments. Now, part of the mission of the SIPC is to bring knowledge and education in the area of sustainable finance and also in sustainable business to a really wide audience. And these webinars help to fulfill that mandate. We've had some amazing speakers this past year, and we look forward to bringing you some more the rest of this year and also into 2013. So please follow us on our website. You'll be able to get more information about some of the speakers who will be coming up. So the agenda for today is going to go as follows. Andrew and I are going to provide you with a brief overview of the SIPC program. We'll then pass it on to Bob, who will present, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for a Q&A for Bob and also for questions that you might have about the SIPC program. So now I'm going to pass you on to Andrew Ross.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. So I'll give you guys a little brief overview of what the SIPC program is all about. It's really designed for finance and corporate professionals with a rigorous training curriculum in the field of sustainability and sustainable finance. It was designed with the help of some professionals here in Montreal and academics here at Concordia University. So it's a very timely program it's designed really for professionals who want to apply all of the knowledge that is learned in the program. It's an online, self-paced, self-study format. So all of the readings, the assignments are online. You can do the modules in whichever order you choose and hand in the assignments at whatever time you prefer. So it's really designed for people who already have jobs and want to do the course on the side. It's really adaptable in that sense. The program has 6 modules with an assignment at the end of each module. Once you complete each assignment, then you are awarded the certificate and you become a certified sustainable investment professional. The way we design the modules is as follows. We start off with an overview of sustainability, kind of touching on some of the general concepts of sustainable development and in the business field. Then we go into an ESG criteria, so environment, social, and governance. We look into ethics, corporate social responsibility, environmental and social sustainability. So some of the main ideas that are out there right now in the field, and then at the end of the course, we go into sustainable finance in the last module, and that's really where we touch on some of the emerging markets, impact investing, and microfinance concepts. Now, here are a couple of bullet points I think sort of summarize the SIPC advantage. It's really about career advancement. So people who take the course are looking long-term. They want to sort of gain an edge compared to some of their other employees, and they're demonstrating a sort of initiative, motivation, and also just expressing that they recognize how the field is changing and there's a need for a more sustainable perspective on the field. It's also about the skills and the knowledge that they want to get, so they want to have the training to respond to their clients who are demanding some of these sustainable questions. It's also becoming recognized with the designation. It's sort of like a CFA designation in that sense. People want to have the designation next to their name and to prove to their it's on their resume that they have the capabilities of offering this kind of consultation. So, and it's also about belonging to a growing network. So after you do the SIPC, you become part of the alumni network. We have a lot of events that come up in the year, webinars like this one that we invite you to, and then it also allows you to talk to other SIPC students who are in the same kind of field and the same thinking as you. So here are some of the supporting partners. Dave's going to talk a bit about the CFA stuff that we have going on here.
So you can see there's some major companies that are supporting the SIPC by becoming partners with us. Obviously, they saw the value and the need for education in this area. And this past year, the CFA designated the SIPC as an approved provider program. So this means that if you have a CFA, you receive your continuing education credits by taking the program. Now, we're also looking for companies and organizations who want to use the SIPC as a training program so that they can provide their employees with skills and knowledge in sustainable investing and business sustainability. and we are looking for educational partners. Currently, the BDC is putting over 15 of their employees through the program, and in this coming year, we'll be looking for new corporate sponsors to join as educational partners as well. So if this is something your organization might be interested in, please give us a shout and we can talk further about this. Lastly, the SIPC winter term is now open for registration. The term is starting January 1st. So if you're interested in the SIPC program, please apply today or contact us with any questions that you may have. So at this point, I'd now like to introduce you to Bob Willard. I'm going to give a brief intro for Bob. Bob's a leading expert on quantifying and selling the business value of corporate sustainable strategies and has given hundreds of keynote presentations to corporate, government, university, and NGO audiences. His 4 books, 2 DVDs, business case simulator dashboard and worksheets, and extensive master slide set provide capacity building resources for sustainability champions. Bob worked 34 years with IBM Canada. He serves on the advisory boards of the Natural Step Canada and Forum for the Future US, and is on an ad hoc advisory committee for sustainable business certificate programs at 3 Ontario colleges and universities. And he's also a citizen member of the Dunham Regional Roundtable on Climate Change. He was inducted into the International Society of Sustainability Professionals Hall of Fame in 2011. He has a PhD in sustainability from U of T, and he's also an award-winning certified B Corp. So we're really happy to have Bob with us, and I'm now going to pass the presentation on to him.
So thank you, Andrew and David. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm especially looking forward to the questions. So my challenge is to be able to seed that discussion with a few framework slides that might be useful, about a dozen of them, and give you a sense about how this business case is a lot more compelling now than it was 10 years ago, and that cover of the book that you see on the slide is simply acknowledging that this is the new version of the business case on the 10th anniversary of the first version of that book that came out in 2002. So this one came out this year in March. Let me start off with a little bit of the language around this, because we hear the word sustainability. We want to make sure that if we're having conversations with other people, that the way they use the term is consistent with ours. So as most of you understand, we're talking about the 3 E's or the 3 P's, very often with the title of the triple bottom line being used as opposed to sustainability. But it's that combination of the 3 different factors, and the 3-legged stool metaphor shows that we need them all to be very sturdy and strong for the company to be successful. Another acronym which has picked up a lot of steam in the last few years is the one that you heard referenced earlier. So environmental, social, and governance, ESG, is becoming a actually almost as popular or even more popular term in the business press as sustainability. Green also has some traction. CSR also has some traction as umbrella terms for the whole stool, not just one leg of them. So a lot of the challenge that we have is using terminology that might be consistent with the way in which the people we're trying to engage in these conversations view these various components. For a lot of the time, I think that maybe we should just stop using the word sustainability and just call it asset management, because what we're talking about is being good stewards of the financial and built and manufactured capital of the organization, understanding that it's dependent on natural capital for its energy, its materials, its food, its water, and as that becomes increasingly scarce or riskier to access, of course, the cost of that starts to be impacted. And then we have the human capital and social capital. Social capital, of course, being your reputation, your relationships with your important stakeholders like customers and investors and community and employees and so on. So what we're talking about is your social license to operate and how important it is to keep that in good shape. It's very easy to measure financial capital. It's getting a little easier to measure natural capital. It's still extremely difficult to measure social capital. On the other hand, if you lose your social capital, you're out of business. If you lose access or ability to access the natural capital that you need, you're out of business. So the importance of these is becoming increasingly evident to most businesses, which is why they're starting to pay more attention to this in the last 3 to 5 years than they did ever before since the Industrial Revolution. They're getting encouragement to do that. There are a couple of articles that some of you may have seen in the Harvard Business Review, which has encouraged them to do that. The sustainability imperative was one of those. And essentially what it's saying is that this has emerged in the last few years because the public, you and me, and governments, some of them, are getting a little bit uneasy about this quartet of things that you see in bold. Of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg, but that's a pretty good starter set of things that are making people a bit uneasy about the future for themselves and their kids and their grandkids and so on. And the word imperative is coming from this notion that not only are companies being expected to do no harm, they're actually being expected to do some good. That is to say, come up with solutions that are going to address these issues, even if it's not their sector. So what's going on is very, very unusual. The expectations of stakeholders that companies will step up to this has gone up exponentially. Whether companies think that's fair or not is another story, but that's the way it is. So essentially the company's social license to operate is jeopardized if they don't step up to this in the eyes of some of those important stakeholders. Another article which was a little bit more upbeat was one that was co-authored by Michael Porter. And what he's really acknowledging is that capitalism as we've known it for the last 150 years is a little bit under siege, and that we need to show that business can provide shared value, that is to say value for the business itself as well as for the community that it's interacting with, and that we need to reinvent capitalism, which is where the Capitalism 2.0 or clean capitalism labels are evolving from. And the good news is if we do that, we unleash a wave of innovation and growth, which sounds like a good thing. So what Porter's pointing out is that not only is there an increased obligation, an imperative, but this could actually be good news. Fortunately, CEOs are starting to get it on this, that they're paying attention to this. And in fact, I want to show you 3 quick slides from a survey that was done twice, 2007 and 2010, where CEOs around the world were asked whether they agreed or strongly agreed that sustainability should be fully embedded in the strategies and operations of their companies. And as you can see in 72, about 72% of them, in 2010, about 72% of them said that. Strangely, after the recession, those numbers went up. This is the first time in the history of a recession that this hasn't dropped right off the radar screen in the boardroom. So essentially what companies are starting to recognize is that this is not something you do when you got nothing better to do. This is something which is actually a set of survival strategies that they can tap into. Plus, the second slide gives you a sense that they're starting to feel increasing pressure from the usual 5 suspects in their stakeholder arena. And frankly, if your customers, employees, governments, communities, and regulators think this is a good idea, it's a good idea. And suddenly the CEO's personal perspective, if it disagrees with this, is becoming kind of irrelevant, because these folks, if they think it's smart to do this, it's smart to do this. And as a CEO, they hope to be able to capitalize on these 3 kinds of major benefits. Improve their image, their reputation, with who? With those folks we saw in the previous slide. Increase their revenue, reduce their cost, and be a talent magnet. And frankly, if you can pull that off with any strategy, you're in good shape. So a lot of us that care about this need to get a little bit smarter on how we actually articulate this relevance to the people that we're trying to engage in this. And if those people look a little bit like this guy, a little bit overwhelmed with their current responsibilities, these 2 piles of priorities on either side of their desk demanding their attention, they're probably measured on at least a couple of them, and you and I come along and say, knock, knock, would you like some sustainability today? This is going to be a tough sell, and at best they're going to put it at the bottom of one of those piles, and frankly they'll never get to it. So here's a strong encouragement. I think we have to be very careful about how we position this thing called sustainability relative to the other things that are going on. So I strongly discourage positioning it as one more goal to worry about, that they should worry about sustainability as well as these other things. Instead of doing that, I think what we need to do is position sustainability as a set of strategies that are going to help them these busy people, hard-nosed business people, help them achieve sooner and better all of the strategies or all of the priorities that are already demanding their attention and driving them nuts. So these are enablers. These are enablers as opposed to goals. So that implies that, you know, if it's going to enable it, that sounds like maybe this little thing called profit is going to be better off than it was before if they are smart about the strategies that they use, some of those being strategies that you and I might call sustainability strategies. So as people trying to get the attention of busy business people, maybe we need to talk their language, and certainly profit is part of that. So this raises the question, can a company actually make more money, more profit, if it pays attention to sustainability? And happily, the answer is a resounding yes, much more so today than even 10 years ago. So the second question that you're going to get hit with is, oh yeah, how much? And that requires us to be able to do a pro forma of what that profit might look like within the next few years if they were simply to do what other companies have already done. And that's what I tried to do in the Sustainability Advantage in the new version of that book. So I'm going to give you a one-slide summary of the business case for sustainability. So what we're looking at here is organizing it around the benefits that companies have been able to, just taking off on me here. Let me go back. Okay, so these are the benefits. The opportunity side, increasing revenue, being able to save some money on the so-called low-hanging fruit associated with saving money on energy, water, materials, and waste. Also, improving the productivity and reducing the turnover of your good employees, as well as avoiding some risks. And you and I know that there are only two reasons that companies ever do anything. It's to capitalize on opportunities and avoid risks. The numbers that you see beside each of those are what, and listen carefully to this because this is really important, is what companies could realize if they simply did what other real companies have already done. So take the best practices of real companies, and if you were to skim those off and simply implement them within your own company, you could make, within the next 3 to 5 years, all of the improvements that you see listed here. You can make at least 9% more revenue. You could reduce your energy costs by at least 75%. That's your electricity and your fuel costs. Reduce your waste and materials costs by 20 and 10%. You can increase the productivity of your employees by at least 2%. By the way, that's the secret sauce for the whole thing. You get your employees pumped on this stuff and magic happens. All of the other magic happens. So very, very important. Reduce turnover. This is the reduction in whatever is costing you for attrition in the organization. You can cut that by at least 25%. And notice that the number at the bottom is 51 to 81%. In other words, they can increase their profits. If their profit was, let's say, 10% today on their revenue, they could up that to 15 to 18% within the next 3 to 5 years simply by doing what other companies have already done. And that may seem like a big number to you. In fact, my biggest challenge, and let me be very candid with you, my biggest challenge in this was to keep those two numbers, the 51 to 81%, under 100%. Frankly, they're up in the hundreds, but I thought if I ever get above 100%, nobody's going to believe this. So I factored down the numbers in the column above brutally to get them down so that this resulting number would be under 100%, so 51 to 81%. In fact, there was so much possibility there that I creamed off half of the waste savings and half of the savings on materials, and I put them into this rotating pool of capital, the Sustainability Capital Reserve, which would allow the funding of additional projects from which you could get additional benefits, and that would feed back into this rotating pool of capital. So essentially what we've got is a self-funding approach here. And if the company decided to take a pass on this and decided, no, I don't get it, I don't believe it, then what would happen if their competitors, for example, did get excited about this and captured these? Well, it could put them at a competitive disadvantage. Their revenue might be negatively impacted. Their expenses might be negatively impacted because they would go up because they're not trying to save them. So that means that their profit could be jeopardized by 16 to 36%, which is the downside. The upside is 51 to 81%. And those are conservative, that is to say, lowball numbers. And this is the art of selling. You need it to get high enough that companies are excited about it, but low enough that you're not insulting the intelligence of the people that theoretically should have discovered that before you pointed it out. So that's a little bit of a challenge. The next slide gives you a sense of where the ranges come from, the 51 to 81%. So I ran the numbers for a small professional services company and a large manufacturing company with 6 people or 3,000 people. By the way, it could be 30,000, it could be 300,000, doesn't matter. It's all scalable. And you can see how the numbers at the bottom are aligned against those two composite companies, sample companies, typical companies. So what this suggests is if we know those things on the left-hand side in the white column, the revenue, etc., down to the number of employees, if we know those for any particular company, we can plug in the appropriate numbers for each of those into the simulator. And then there is a simulator on my website. There's a dashboard version of it. It's free. It's open source. You can do whatever you want. Plug in your own numbers into that and see what might be possible on the profit side and the risk side for your particular organization. You can tune the numbers according to your own best judgment as you think what might be possible. And there's a set of worksheets that you can download. They're open source. They're free. That you can also use to see what might be possible for your own particular company and tailor them to suit your own purposes, both the language as well as assumptions that you think are more appropriate for yours. It's documented to death, and hopefully those resources might be useful to you. So what I'm trying to help you understand is that this business case is almost embarrassingly good. Really, really good, especially if we are more holistic in the benefits that we capture within the framework of the business case. And the main value of the whole thing is the framework. And in fact, I really want to caution you about doing this on your own and kind of sliding it under the door of the CEO and saying, you know, I told you so. That wouldn't be cool. So what you want to do is engage them with this framework as a catalyst to a conversation where you kind of go through what their best judgment and best information and data might suggest would be possible for them within the next 3 to 5 years, given the experience of other companies that have been able to do these kinds of things. So that's the profit, that's the income statement, that's the profit and loss statement version of the business case. If you're interested in the investment side of the certificate that this is a part of, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an indication as to how things might look from an investor point of view. So the holy grail of all of this is, yeah, okay, I got this on the profit side, but is this going to help the share price? And of course, that has a lot to do with the link between profit and share price, but it also has the linkage with something else. So let me just give you a sense of what that might look like using this metaphor. So I'm using the iceberg as a metaphor for the overall market value of the company. The part that we can see and touch and measure easily is the top part, which is normally called by the accountants, as you might expect, the tangibles or the financials. And that's where the balance sheet is a huge help to us, and it's the book value of the company. So that's what that piece of the overall company value is. The part that is a little bit mushier or a little bit harder to get our heads around is the intangibles, the reputational stuff, the goodwill of the company. But the combination of that and the book value is what gives us the market capitalization. So another way of saying that is if you want to find out how much the intangibles, reputation, and goodwill add up to, just figure out how much the company is worth by multiplying their share prices by the number of shares at each of those prices and subtract the book value, and you end up with the bottom of the iceberg. So intangibles, reputation, and goodwill. So what? Well, what's going on is really, really interesting. What's going on is an evolution in the way in which this iceberg is above and below the water. In 2010, about 80% of the market value of a company was coming from so-called intangibles and goodwill, below the waterline. And the reason that that's significant is that it wasn't always like that. A few years before, in 1998, it was more like a 30-70 split. Back in 1980 or 81, it was more like an 80-20 split. Back in 1978, it was more like a 95-5 split. In other words, the significance of the bottom of the iceberg as a contributor to overall market value has gone up dramatically within the last 30 years. So what we're looking at here is that this so-called social license to operate that we were talking about before, this reputation part, this goodwill part, is becoming much, much more significant as a contributor to and a support for the market value of the company. So, how do these dynamics play out? Well, if we take this same iceberg again, and we say, well, okay, what they want to do is have a good reputation, a bank of goodwill, with all of these various stakeholders who are floating around the bottom of the iceberg. And hopefully, they're going to be friendly. They're going to enjoy what the company is doing and enhance its intangibles, its reputation, and its goodwill. On the other hand, there are some storm clouds that are starting to loom on the horizon, things that are starting to become a little bit more top of mind for important stakeholders, especially the climate change and the energy crisis in the middle. And what's happening is that that sea of stakeholders has started to become a little bit more agitated, a little bit more roiling than it was before. And some of those dolphins are turning into sharks, where they're starting to become significantly more demanding on what their expectations of a company are in terms of its proactive efforts to address some of those storm clouds on the horizon. And therefore, the connections between how well a company does on some of these so-called sustainability issues and its market price is starting to become a little bit easier to connect the dots between. So not only is it a good profit catalyst, it's a great way to improve your reputation with important stakeholders, including shareholders. And that's the way in which the finance committee, the investment community, is starting to connect the dots, that some of these risks are material. Some of these risks are material. And the reason they're material is that the social license to operate with some of those stakeholders could be put in jeopardy. So that's a little bit of an overview of some of the dynamics, the very exciting dynamics that are going on to help companies be a little bit more interested in this than they would have been a few years ago. And essentially what that does is say that the business case, the justification, the rationale for paying more attention to these kinds of strategies is a lot more today than it was a few years ago. So with that as a little bit of a warm-up to sort of prime the pump, I'd be delighted to have a discussion driven by your questions on this.
Okay, that's great, Bob. Thanks so much for that. It's a really interesting presentation. I'm sure it's going to spark a lot of questions from our audience. So we'll get going on the Q&A. Just so you know, if you do have a question, you can click on the little hand icon you see on your control panel. That's going to give you the option to ask a question out loud that Bob will be able to hear as well. Otherwise, you can also type a question into the question box that you see in your control panel. Andrew and I will see that, and we'll read it out loud for Bob to answer. So we'll get going with the questions. One of the questions we have right off the bat is whether you can watch this presentation as a slideshow or a recorded slideshow. The answer is yes. We'll put this up on our website under past webinars, the past webinars section. It usually takes a few days for that to happen. So sometime early next week, you'll be able to find this presentation. You have a question?
I should add to that as well, that if you're really interested in the backup to the backup to the backup of all of this, what you've seen here is about a dozen slides. I've got a master set of slides that's about 700 slides, many of them animated as well, which I use as my way of summarizing what's moving and shaking out there these days. So if you're interested in this, you can subscribe to those slides for $39. And you get 4 quarterly updates a year for that annual subscription. And some of that may be useful for you. They're in PowerPoint format, so you can cut and paste stuff into your own templates. So if that resource is of interest to you, explore it on my website that you can see at the bottom. And I encourage you to use the tools. I mean, the dashboard and the worksheets are all free. The DVDs are available online as well as otherwise. And they're simply DVDs of typical talks that I do on this. As you may or may not know, I really don't do consulting. I do talks. I'm kind of the Johnny Appleseed of this effort. So I plant seeds with audiences. I usually do 80 to 100 talks a year, and this year I'm doing about 130. So the interest is really, really high, which is exciting. So companies are really trying to get their heads around this and do it in a smart way, which is great.
Okay, great. We have a question from Daniela. We'll see if this works. Daniela, you can ask away.
I was just wondering, we all know about the financial crisis. How has this impacted the interest in sustainable practices as you said?
Sorry, Bob, the question from Daniela was a little scratchy. Daniela, if you don't mind typing the question in, we can read it out loud. I hope that's okay.
Or maybe just turn off your speakers while you're asking the question. I think you're getting feedback so that we're hearing both.
Yeah, okay, great. So we'll move on to another one. This is from Maya. What do you see as the contribution of academic research to making a meaningful business case for sustainability? Has academic research in this area been useful to businesses?
Yes and no. Of course, a lot of what's required is the translation from academic language into business language. There is an organization called the Network for Business Sustainability, NBS, out of University of Western Ontario's Ivey School of Business. And what they do is try to connect researchers with companies who are really trying to find out answers to some questions. So they kind of plant possible topics for professors and doctoral students to do as part of their research. So we're trying to make sure that we take full advantage of that kind of brain power to help address some of the important questions that business people have. So yeah, some of the research is really good. Much of it is way too theoretical to be as relevant as we'd like it to be. But I think there's a very conscious effort going on to try to connect the dots between the interests of academics and the interests of business people.
Okay, that's great. We have a question, actually a comment and a question from Guillaume, who's actually at Concordia with us. With regards to my comment, I'll just read the, sorry Andrew, go up, can you scroll up to Guillaume's original? Okay, so actually here's Guillaume's question. With regards to my comment above on changing worlds, I think we already technically and objectively in the second world. We're just not there yet cognitively. The question becomes, how do we get cognitively to the biophysical world we already live in? Unfortunately, we don't have the original context for Guillaume's question, so I'm hoping that might make sense, Bob.
Yeah, this is a real challenge. As those of us that are really into this start to recognize that things aren't going very well in the world, there's a real danger that we'll be perceived as running around saying the sky is falling and the world's going to end and all that kind of stuff. And people get traumatized by that. So the real trick is for us to acknowledge that we really do have a need to reverse some of the trend lines associated especially with ecosystems and our impacts on them, our collective impacts on them. The biggie, of course, is climate change, and we're kind of running out of runway to be able to do anything useful on that. And the trick is to have that conversation without having people just give up as opposed to be energized. So it's a delicate balancing act. We do need to ensure that the traditional and so-called legitimate media do a much better job of getting the word out that there are some very significant issues, perhaps even more significant than who wins American Idol, that we need to step up to. And I think that that's happening more at the grassroots level than at the sort of state, provincial / national / international level. People locally are getting it, and they're getting on with some wonderfully creative approaches to it. But being able to convey that message in an energizing, exciting, let's get on with it way, as opposed to, running around saying we're all going to die, that's part of the challenge for those of us that are very aware of what we're faced with.
Okay, that's great. We have Daniela's question now. How did the financial crisis impact or not interest of developing sustainability strategies within corporations? I read it has taken a back seat. Would you agree with that, Bob?
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't believe how strong the status quo is in the financial communities, that they got away with what they got away with without having to change. I knew that they were strong. I didn't realize quite how strong. So we really do have to get pressure put on the financial community and on governments from some of the biggest players on the planet, and they're called big companies. And a lot of the proactive initiatives that we're looking for from companies isn't only to do with their internal operations and even the operations of their supply chain. It's using their leverage, their influence on the financial community and on governments to clean up their act and pay more attention to the things that matter. The financial community is almost scary in the way in which it can duck all of these things. The good news is that the accountants are starting to help us do this. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, and the Integrated Reporting Board, or Integrated Reporting Effort, even the Securities Exchange Commission, is starting to legitimize a lot of these issues as being part of the risk analysis associated with a company. In other words, what happens if you don't do this stuff? And so the bridge so far between the financial statement, the annual statement, annual financial report, and the sustainability report, the annual sustainability report, has been through the MD&A part of the financial or annual report, the management discussion and analysis part. And that's where the risks get extrapolated from, and the accountants are saying, we want you to include the environmental and social risks as well as the financial risks. There is an amazing effort going on behind the scenes to try to make that a lot tighter, and a lot of the integrated reporting effort going on in the accounting community is all about that, making sure that the material metrics that are associated with sustainability are legitimized as part of the financial report. And that's very, very exciting. And I think that that will have a spillover effect onto the financial community. But frankly, the financial community, I think, will be the last ones to get it.
Okay, thanks, Bob. This is from Marc-Andre. I'm wondering what sector or kind of business would profit more in a sustainability program, and also what would be the general sectors not as prone to getting a good business case?
Yeah, I was really hoping for that too. I'm amazed at how that bottom line profit can go up for all sectors. The contributors are going to change dramatically depending on whether you're in a banking or retail sector, whether you're a small company or a large company. But if you're in a consulting business, for example, of course that employee productivity line is much, much more critical to you because that's your major asset, the people that are doing the consulting. On the other hand, if you're in a manufacturing environment, a lot of those environmental related benefits are going to be more relevant to you. So the energy, water, material, and waste savings, the low-hanging fruit, are going to be significantly more relevant to you. Banks can capitalize on that, but it's primarily paper waste. The total can be quite similar. It's the contributors that are going to be different depending on the sector.
Okay, that's great. We have a question here from Terra Walker, who you might know. She says, "Hi, Bob. A few weeks back, our group used your materials, very useful, to prepare a presentation for our MBA class on sustainable business strategies. We ran into a bit of resistance with believing the numbers, the possible revenue generation, cost reductions, etc. The underlying assumptions were difficult to substantiate. We suggested that your framework is a starting point. How do we use your dashboard to maximize value when helping companies look at the potential benefits of adopting more sustainable practices?"
Yeah. The dashboard is not too bad as a first taste test for what it all is. The real gold is in the worksheets, the Excel worksheets. So if you were to download the Excel worksheets and, for example, look at revenue, as you put your cursor over revenue, up pops a comment box. And what I've done is cut and paste into the Excel worksheets a lot of the examples that I used in the book to substantiate the assumptions that I was making. Frankly, all of those assumptions are way too conservative, but I wanted to at least give some examples that were credible examples of what companies have already done. As you tailor these for a specific company, you may want to replace those examples with other examples within the particular sector that that company is in. This is a starter set. This is a generic starter set of what is possible. The intent is that you do exactly that, that you take that and tailor it appropriately for a company. And frankly, if some of these they say, you know, there's just nothing there, it's zero, leave it zero. Move on to the next one, because you only need a couple of these to be able to have a really compelling business case. And usually the egos of the senior folks in the company are high enough that they would feel, well, if somebody else has been able to pull this off, surely we can. So my experience, feedback from people that have used these things, is that the bottom line number usually ends up a lot higher than what I suggested it might be. So I really encourage you to use them as tools, to take ownership of them and use them as things that can be tailored appropriately for the company that you're working with.
Okay, that's great. We have a question here from...
I didn't make the numbers up. Let me tell you, I just want to emphasize something here, because people sometimes don't get this. I did not make this up. In fact, I worked very, very, very hard to have behind every assumption and assumptions behind assumptions something from which I could articulate an assumption that I made. So the book is essentially my logic as to how I came to these numbers based on all of the evidence that's out there and all of the war stories of what companies have actually been able to do, the case studies, the research, etc. But I fully understand, fully appreciate that these need to be adjusted appropriately for a particular company.
Yeah, that's great. Sean Hogan, how difficult is it to put a monetary value on these intangibles that contribute to the increased share prices? And do you believe that as these intangibles increase, as you have shown, will the market have a backlash at one point, such as the recession in 2008?
Yeah, well, let me answer the second part first. I'm not sure that the market will have a big backlash. I think the companies which are making genuine efforts to try to address these issues will benefit from it. That is to say, they'll be deemed as being more valuable in the business community, and therefore there may be a change as to whose share prices are worth the most. But as an overall market, I'm not sure that the overall market's going to get sewered by this. But there will be some adjustments, but hopefully some of the better companies will benefit from those adjustments. The other question about how do we do the calculation, especially CRISPR calculations around intangibles, right now you understand how the math works. It's a subtraction. You take the number of shares multiplied by the value of shares, that gives you the size of the entire iceberg, the whole iceberg, the market valuation. From that, you subtract the tip of the iceberg, which is the book value of the company, and what you end up with is the intangibles. So it's an indirect way of making those calculations. What I tried to show with the iceberg metaphor is that it looks like the contributors to those intangibles, those non-financials, the goodwill part, are becoming more significant than they were before, both in their proportion of the overall market value of the company, as well as the expectations of the shareholders, stakeholders, employees, communities, regulators, investors, as to whether this company is going to be around in the future. So I think that some of the efforts going on in the accounting community to be better with the metrics around some of the social and environmental capital that we're trying to size will result in us having better metrics around these so-called intangibles, and they'll become more tangible with metrics that matter.
Okay, great. So we have time for a few more questions. Most big companies have the resources to actually measure some, if not many, of the intangibles that benefit from that are benefited from a sustainable strategy. But small companies, don't have these resources. So we often have to get the manager to intuitively be aware of the intangibles. Any secrets to how to rigorously measure those in a small business? In the case of the person asking the question, it's pharmacies.
Sure. Let me give a fairly sector-independent kind of answer. There are three reasons that smaller companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, pay attention to this stuff. The first one is that whoever's in charge of the company gets religion on it for whatever reason. For personal reasons, they just decide to clean up their act. It's amazing what can happen when they start to really proactively address environmental and social efforts. There's a little company in Cambridge, a metal fabrication company, manufacturing company. The guy woke up in 2006, had his first kid, saw the Al Gore movie, bought a Prius, kind of had a change of life, and he decided to save energy. He saved 58% of his energy within 3 years using 42 different projects. He increased his profit from just working on energy. He increased his profit by 78% in 3 years. And the average payback on those 42 projects was 6.3 months. Magic happens when people in charge of little organizations decide to do it. So the first reason is the founder decides to do it. Second reason is they're driven there by regulations which drive them nuts. And the third one is the most powerful of all. The third one is that their customers, especially if they're B2B type organizations, if their business customer starts to put these requirements on them that they step up to these kinds of issues, then all of a sudden this sounds like it's kind of an interesting, in fact, it's a fascinating thing to pay attention to. So when Walmart sent out a questionnaire in 2005 to their 100,000 suppliers, asking them 15 questions on their sustainability index about their energy, their materials, their water, their waste, their own supply chains, and how they were treating employees, all of a sudden this sounded like it was something that these companies should be paying attention to. And that would have more influence than any regulation on the planet would have. When your big customers asking those questions, magic happens. And all the big customers are asking those questions these days because they are feeling the heat, not only for their own operations, but accountability for their entire supply chain. And that's driving them nuts, as well as requiring them to be a lot closer to and more helpful with and asking about what the heck is going on in their supply chain. So you want to change the behavior of a small and medium-sized enterprise, get their largest customer to ask them to. And all of a sudden this becomes material.
Okay, Bob, that's a great answer. We're going to take about 2 more questions. One is from Josiane. If I want to write a thesis on the integration of sustainability in the strategy of an organization, what theoretical conversation could you suggest this in terms of authors, anything like that?
Wow, that's a huge question. It depends on whether you're trying to figure out why a company would do that, that's the motivational part, or the how part. And those overlap a bit, but they may be different sources. Essentially, a lot of that is driven by the fact that this looks like a smart business thing to do. They're not going to do it unless it makes smart business sense. Smart business sense normally means that you can justify this with something that looks like it's got dollar signs on it. And that's what the business case was trying to do. So companies aren't doing this just for the hell of it. They're doing it because this is going to make them stronger, more sustainable, more successful companies. They're not doing it to save the world, let me tell you. They are doing it because they are either trying to avoid risks or capture opportunities. And the articulation of how those 2 things might look is what that framework was intended to give you a little bit of a head start on as a business case. But how they actually bake it into their policies and the way in which they engage with stakeholders and the decision-making processes that they use in their organization, all of which are all about governance, has a lot to do with how sincere, how authentic they are with their desire to actually do this.
Okay, so we're going to take one last question.
If you want further information on that, beyond what I gave you, send me an email as well as if you want to explore that further, but that's kind of the elevator speech on governance.
Okay, so the last question we'll take is from Crystal. I believe in the business case, but in my experience, there's still significant resistance when it comes to making the required investments to achieve these advantages. What do you think is the greatest reason for this resistance, and how can we change it? And I know you've answered some of that in some of your other answers, Bob, but do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Frankly, that was the research question that I used on my own doctorate. After I finished the first book in 2002, the question was screaming inside my own head was, if it's this good, how come everybody's not doing it? I mean, this looks incredibly good. So I decided to do some rigorous research to try to answer that question. And that was why I did the doctorate at the University of Toronto, and my thesis was actually my second book. So the one-word answer, mindset. Business people are so used to the bureaucracy and cost of stepping up to environmental type regulations that they cannot believe, in fact it's inconceivable to them, that anything to do with environment or green could possibly be an engine for growth and success. They have so much baggage around all of this stuff that they can't possibly associate good stuff with things that were driving them nuts as they went from going from pre-compliance to compliance. To get beyond that, and there are 5 stages that companies go through, which we haven't talked about here, but for them to get beyond compliance, beyond compliance requires them to start to change their mindset and start to realize that actually this green stuff could be really, really neat. Not only can we save energy or perhaps mitigate climate change, we can add a lot to our bottom line. So why companies get into this may be a little bit on the strange side to begin with, but as they get into it, they start to change their mindset about whether this is good news or bad news. And just in closing, the key thing is that they start to understand that this sustainability stuff is not a sacrifice. It's an advantage, which is why the title of that book is called that. It's not called the Sustainability Sacrifice. It's called the Sustainability Advantage, to help them understand that this isn't an anchor. This is an accelerator. And as soon as they start to clue into that, magic happens.
Okay, that's great, Bob. I think we're going to stop the webinar there. We had some a really good Q&A session, and Bob, thanks to you again for a really enlightening presentation and your comments as well in this whole area, which is fascinating and really timely and relevant for us all. So I just want to say a big thank you to for you to participate today. We really appreciated it.
It was fun, and thank you all for your questions. That's the fun part for me, and there's so much going on, and the timing of your interest in this is so perfect compared to what it would have been 5 to 10 years ago. The readiness factor in a business community to have these conversations is a lot higher, and I encourage you to help move the ball further through your own contacts and networks. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, and thanks to everyone.